What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, November 22nd edition of the NBA Lineup Generator video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. We have a massive 14-game NBA slate tonight. No NBA tomorrow since it's Thanksgiving, so almost every team in action tonight. And that means that we have plenty of value and more opening up throughout the day. We have plenty of superstars that we can pay for, and we have a very, very strong range of second tier players in terms of salary, guys that aren't quite as expensive as Jokic or Doncic, but that look really, really good tonight. And we're going to use the lineup generator to get a look at how we are able to get to those guys in lineups that we expect to be profitable. If you aren't familiar with the tool, we'll walk through it as we go through the video. But in general, it utilizes our player projections, ownership projections, and our models to present to you lineups that we project to be profitable in the long run. And then you have the ability to choose the lineups that you like or dislike. You have some customization options as well. And I'm going to show you how all of that works while we walk through DraftKings and FanDuel. But first, make sure you hit the thumbs up button on YouTube. Give us a like there. If you're watching on Twitter, a like there helps us out as well. And if you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you get notifications when our shows go live. Now, starting on DraftKings, the first option you have is the lineup type that you want. I'm going to choose contrarian lineups for the purpose of this video, get a look at some of the contrarian lineups that we can play in larger field tournaments tonight. Now, the next option you have is to lock a player in. This isn't something that I recommend doing if you're playing multiple lineups, but it can be really useful if you're playing one lineup or maybe even three lineups. For example, you know that you want Daniel Gafford. Why waste your time looking at lineups that don't have Gafford if you are only going to choose ones that have him? It can be useful in that sense, but for this video, I'm going to skip it. And now we're going to start getting to these lineups, and I'm going to save the first 20 that we get. But as you can see here, you get the salary at the top, the fantasy point projection, the ownership projection, and then you get each individual player in the lineup along with their projected fantasy points and their ownership projection. Down here at the bottom, we have sliders because a fantasy point projection doesn't mean anything on its own. Neither does an ownership projection. It matters how they compare to the field, the rest of your lineups, your alternatives. And so here you can see that this lineup projects reasonably well, and it is contrarian compared to the alternatives. So I'm going to save the first 20 lineups that we get, and then we can look at how our player exposures shape up and how we can change some of that if we want to. So we save these first 20 lineups. And over here on the right-hand side, you can see our player exposures. Over here on the left-hand side, you get your saved lineups. Now, on the right-hand side, some different names at the top. Mo Bamba coming in 50% of the time. This is not somebody that was even on the radar this morning, but Joel Embiid was ruled out a little bit ago. So it's likely that we get Paul Reed in the starting lineup and likely that we get Bamba as the backup. So he's showing up in 50% of our lineups at just $3,000. He is not the best NBA player, but he is a solid enough fantasy producer, and we should see some minutes from him tonight without Embiid, backing up Paul Reed, rather. Paul Reed is 5K on DraftKings, but he's showing up a lot for us as well. He is most likely going to get the start in place of Embiid. He's a good fantasy point per minute guy. So not too surprising to see either of those guys up there. Daniel Gafford was getting around 65% ownership this morning. That has since come down, or nope, actually it's still there at 65%. I thought that it would come down. Let me refresh this. I don't think it hasn't come down now, but it should come down throughout the day. Having Paul Reed and having Bamba should bring that down. We haven't refreshed ownership with Embiid out yet. So I think we'll see Gafford come down. You'll see Reed and Bamba come up. But all three of these guys are going to be very, very popular center options tonight at 5K or less on DraftKings, and we're getting to them. We're getting to Gordon Hayward in a very favorable matchup against the Wizards. Sasha Vezenkov's a weird one that probably goes away as we get closer to lock. The Kings are not expecting to have Keegan Murray tonight. He's listed as questionable, but he did not go through shoot around. Vezenkov, Chris Duarte, and Trey Lyles all did go through shoot around. So we're getting to Vezenkov right now. I do think he kind of disappears. Ish Smith, 3,200, backup point guard for Charlotte. Good game environment, reasonable price tag. Probably lose some of him by lock as well, just because he's not a particularly exciting option. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is likely to be starting for the Timberwolves in place of an injured Jaden McDaniels. If he does start, he's likely playing upper 20s in minutes, around 0.75 fantasy points per minute this year, but at a $3,700 price tag, that'll look pretty good. Melton could see some extra offensive production with no Embiid tonight. LeBron James, LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges all look like very good options. James taking on a Dallas team that doesn't I don't think have the reputation of being a great fantasy matchup, but they've actually been one of the fastest teams in the league this year while also being one of the worst defensive teams. That's going to look good for LeBron. LaMelo in a great spot against Washington. He's produced a little over 1.5 fantasy points per minute in 37 minutes per game in the games he's played without Terry Rozier this year. Miles Bridges started and played 40 minutes in regulation last game. So his price tag has come up quite a bit, but he still looks good. We're getting to some Nick Batum without Joel Embiid as well. So some ugly names here, but also some names that make a lot of sense. One thing that does stand out is that of the expensive options we're getting to, it's LeBron and LaMelo. We're not really seeing a lot of Jokic. We're not seeing a lot of Luka. You just have such a strong like 9 to 10K range, give or take, on DraftKings. That's where a lot of the exposure is coming into. Now, before we look at any of the individual lineups, let's say you are looking at these player exposures and like I did, you're just like, yeah, I don't really want 25% Sasha Vesenkov. You can click his name right here and it's going to highlight all of your Vesenkov lineups. And then you can just very simply go in and there's two things you can do. First, you could just go to him. You can click these arrows here on the right and you can either just swap him, scroll down and swap him to another $3,000 forward, or you can swap multiple players. So like in this lineup, maybe there's not another 3K guy that you want, but you could scroll down and say swap Vesenkov to somebody like Austin Reeves, and then you're going to I lost that lineup, so bad example, but then once you refine that lineup, you can swap him back up to, or you can swap someone else down to make up that salary. So I didn't realize it was going to disappear, but that's one way you can do it. The other way you can do it is to just go to a Vesenkov lineup, click discard. Now you have 19 lineups instead of 20. You go here to get more lineups, and then just take the next lineup that does not have Vesenkov, and we're now down to 15%. So there's a couple ways you can handle that. And then looking at just an individual lineup here, this first one, 269 fantasy point projection, 111% aggregate ownership. So we're starting off with a 6.5% owned Tyrese Halliburton. Very, very strong contrarian play. One of the best players in the NBA. 23% ownership coming into Alexander Walker. Then we're getting another low owned play in Desmond Bane that gives us a high ceiling with essentially half of Memphis sideline. Najee Marshall, nothing exciting there, but he's 1% owned. Daniel Gafford, one of the most popular plays on the slate. Shaden Sharp, 7,200, 4% owned. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but I'm assuming no Malcolm Brogdon tonight, which will make him look a little bit better. Vesenkov not getting any ownership. Again, I think he probably goes away, but 1% owned there. And then Bam Adebayo as another very high upside, 5% owned guy. So now we're going to do the same thing and take a look at FanDuel. But before we get into that, if you are looking to use this tool for yourself, which I highly recommend, it's only $14.95 per week. We created this tool with the lower stakes, lower volume players in mind, single entry, 3 max, 20 max, whatever it may be. We have some very powerful tools elsewhere on the site, like our Sims tool, that I highly recommend if you're playing the volume to support it. But if you're somebody playing a $4 20 max every night and you're putting out $80, $100, it's important to pay attention to what you're subscribing to, because you can very quickly, even if the tools you're purchasing are great, you can very quickly put yourself in a hole that you're just not playing enough volume to realistically climb out of. That's why we created this tool. $14.95 a week. It's much more affordable, and it's still leveraging all of those other powerful tools that we have. You don't have all of the same inputs, but in some ways, that's also just a way that it makes it more difficult for you to screw things up. The more control you have, obviously the more mistakes you can make, but you're still getting the end result here where we are simulating lineups using our player projections and our ownership projections, and we're giving you the end result, which is lineups that we expect to be profitable. You can sign up using the link in the description below if you're watching on YouTube, or the link that I tweet out on Twitter if you're watching it there. Now, getting into FanDuel, going to go with contrarian lineups again, and we're not going to lock anybody. We're going to just take these first 20 lineups and see how they look, just like we did on DraftKings. And so now we're going to go to view saved lineups, and some similar names at the top. Paul Reed, 4,500 center, getting 75% of him right now. DeAnthony Melton at 6,100 looks good. $6,700 price tag for Sharp, so even more favorable pricing than on DraftKings. We're getting to a lot of him. Nick Batum could play a bit more and be a bit more productive without Embiid tonight. Halliburton is more favorably priced on FanDuel than DraftKings. Sabonis looks good. John Collins, Kuzma, Olynyk, all coming in at 20%, along with Jeremy Grant and Tim Hardaway Jr., and then Mike Conley coming in around 15% as well. Now, looking over at the individual lineups, not a ton of ownership coming into these, and that's not really surprising given that we have a 14-game slate. It's not very tough to find contrarian options. Now, looking at this first one that we selected, DeAnthony Melton and Mike Conley are your point guards, both 15% owned. At shooting guard, you have Mikal Bridges at 18%. at 7,600. Only 6% ownership coming into Jordan Poole is pretty interesting. $6,500 price tag is reasonable. He's in a very favorable game environment against the Charlotte Hornets, the worst defensive team in the league, top 10 in pace as well. Poole has not been good this year by an NBA standard or a fantasy standard, really. But it is a good spot. It is nice ownership there. 4% ownership coming into Desmond Bane at 8,800, small forward eligible. That's pretty nice. 16% coming into Sharp. We have a very high upside contrarian play in an $8,700 Victor Wembanyama at 2% owned. Nick Batum pulling 10% ownership at 4K. And then another contrarian play with a 5% owned Jared Allen at 6,600. So you can see here a nice thing about 14 game slates or bigger slates in general is that you can get some really good players at low ownership. On shorter slates, a lot of times you get your 5, 6, 7% owned guys, and they are just flat out terrible. Here you're talking about Jordan Poole, who, depending on the context, is flat out terrible. But, Victor Wembanyama, Jared Allen, these are not guys that you mind playing at all. Desmond Bane. So pretty appealing lineup here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for checking out the video. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Remember to sign up using the link in the description below, and enjoy your Thanksgiving tomorrow.